Hello, Kenny here with Gardening Simplified. And today I'm doing a video on hardiness zones versus first frost dates. The thing about it is a lot of videos will tell you that you plant your garden according to your hardiness zone. And what happens with that is that you end up with the first frost date that's a whole lot different than a lot of other people in that hardiness zone, and so you end up with a crop that doesn't have enough time to make. Hardiness zones are designed for that. What they are actually are the low winter temperatures. So if you're going to purchase, say, fruit trees or fruit crops, some of your plants that you'll put out, you need to make sure that they're winter hardy for your area. So you would get a plant that was for a certain hardiness zone. When you're planting your garden, your hardiness zone has nothing to do with it. Now, a lot of people, I'll hear them comment as far as what zone they're in, and I watch other YouTube videos, and a lot of the other YouTube videos are basically in the same hardiness zone than mine, but their temperatures are totally different, because the hardiness zone has nothing to do with, say, your summertime high temperatures, rainfall, a whole lot of other things that would be you'd have to consider whenever you're planting certain types of crops. So be aware of that when you go to plant. And I can show you here. I've got a map. Now this is a map of a hardiness zone right here, and this is the map of the first frost dates. And as you can see, they don't line up together. In fact, a lot of the first frost dates go way down in a lot of different hardiness zones. So you think that you might could plant. Now, a lot of your seed packs just tell you hardiness zones and planting at certain times, but it's not necessarily going to be the same. Sometimes you have to adjust when you plant certain things. Now, you can download or you can print off copies. This is a planting guide for my area. It gives the months, and it gives it a little line, and the pointed arrow tells when it's a little questionable. The best time is whenever it's at its widest point there. That's the best time to plant. But these are not set in stone. Whenever I plant, it's just like my carrots. I planted some carrots a week or so ago. Probably about 2 weeks ago, and they're up, they're doing fine. I have to give them a lot of extra water because where we're at, our temperatures, we've been having a lot of temperatures that's been running up into the mid-90s, and we're in zone 8B, but there's other people in zone 8B at different places that don't see those kind of temperatures, and so in effect, they might have an easier time on their crops as far as raising them. You know, if if it gets too hot, carrots don't want to germinate, so you have to do certain things, or I have to adjust to do it. And you might use shade cloth and different things like that, but you need to know your first frost date. And the easiest way to do that, you can just Google first frost date for your city and state, and something will come up. First frost date calculator come up, and this is the average first frost date. And a lot of these charts, when you Google it and you go to it, they'll give you what percentage of the time that it's going to be first frost by a certain time period. Here, our first frost date, I think, is somewhere towards about November 20th, something like that. And so even though I'm in 8B, there's other places that their first frost date might be earlier than that, or it might be later than that. So you need to know what your first frost date is when you're planting second crops. Now, when you're planting cold weather crops, and especially if you're up north, because you have an advantage that you have cooler temperatures come on sooner, what you need to be aware of is the temperature that a crop can go down to without it killing it. Now, a lot of crops like your brassicas, they do a frost just fine. In fact, some of them, like Brussels sprouts, once they get a frost, they're a lot sweeter, they're better. So you need to understand that, and it doesn't take much research. I mean, I know you're on the internet because you're seeing this video, and it doesn't take much to Google and put in this particular crop and see what temperatures it'll withstand. Some up north, you get colder temperatures earlier. Some of these first frost, and you can check first freeze dates too, because now some of your brassicas, like cauliflower, I think goes down to like 5 degrees. You know, so it's not going to affect it. I may be wrong, but I think that's what it was. It's not going to affect it, and a lot of your brassicas handle freeze just fine. It's when it gets below that, you start getting down to 28, and then some's at 15. You know, it's different temperatures, but you can find out what those temperatures are. And even at that, don't give up on it. It doesn't cost much to take and go out and buy you some fleece and make you some little wire hoops, or even buy the wire hoops. I like to make mine. Tractor Supply's got a good 9-gauge wire that you can just that's made for tensioning fence corners and H's and stuff like that. But it's perfect for cutting into hoops for your to lay your fleece on and stuff. So, and a lot of people, they just put sticks down in there, and they'll put a can or something on top, or a plastic water bottle on top, just so it won't tear a hole in it. There's a lot of ways that you can do that to set it up to where you can keep those cooler weather crops from losing them, even when your temperatures get down some. Now they're not like they might, depend on how thick of fleece you use, it might get you down 4 to 8 degrees, you know, because you're going to get some ground heat. But if it stays there for a long time, your temperature is going to drop. They definitely help when you have a plant that's frost sensitive, like if you're going to plant lettuce and it's going to get too cold or get a frost on it. A lot of times it'll handle the cool, but the frost will damage the leaves. So you need to know this about your plants. But the main thing you need to know is that average first frost date, because whenever you do that, you can start calculating back. I've talked about this in other videos, but I thought I might need to make another one, because so many people that are doing gardening channels, they always refer to your zone, and your zone has nothing to do with your garden plants, because it has to do with the hardiness of plants that are like your fruit trees and such as that you have to worry about them being in the ground, or sometimes they need a certain amount of chill hours in the wintertime, so you need to be in a certain zone where some plants wouldn't grow here, even though we don't get that cold. They'd grow, but they would never make fruit because they don't get enough chill hours. And that's whenever your zone hardiness comes in. You need to know that type of thing. I have apple trees here, Honeycrisps. They say that Honeycrisp won't grow in this area. Well, they won't make apples every year, but they do make apples. And even though they're not recommended for here, like I say, you can plant them and you can grow them, because I have got apples on my trees. But do understand, sometimes when you're planting, you need to take and do some adjustments. Now, a lot of times whenever I get ready, and this is part of my succession planting series, because we're going into fall, we need to consider our fall crops. We want to have the best crops the quickest. Now, certain seeds do better when they're planted in the ground, but a lot of plants do just as good when they're transplanted. And for me in the south, or 8B where I'm at in East Texas, some of the plants, and especially if you try to start seeds, and if you still have a little bit of a problem with a pest, such as flea beetles, or I don't know that I have a lot of flea beetles, but leaf miners, different things like that, even grasshoppers some years. When your plant starts coming up, they're going to start eating the little seedlings, so it's not gonna come up. I had, even during my succession planting with my beans, I had something come up and eat a lot of the leaves and damage them enough that they just stunted and they're sitting there not growing. So some plants, it's just easier to seed them in seed trays. I plan to today seed my beets, which according to my planning time, it's not quite time to put these in. I think it's more the middle of the month when you put them out. But if I start them in seed trays, they're already up. If I get them big enough before I put them out, that I don't have to worry about the pests being able to affect them as much, as long as I have the moisture there for them to form their roots and to get in. I'll have a healthy crop. Plus, that takes a lot less seed because I'm not putting a lot in there and then have to pull out so many where I'm planting down a row. Same thing with my spinach. Normally, I'd just seed a row and I'd go pick it. But when I do it in seed trays, and I'm going to be planting two different types, one of them is kind of a larger spinach, and instead of planting a row and hoping that you can get them even spaced, it's just as easy for me to take and plant them in seed trays and then put them out. The way I do a lot of these plants, and I have some right here. These are left over, and they're real leggy. These are real leggy. They could still be planted. They'd come up. When I take a brassica and I plant this, what I would do is I actually plant it up pretty close to where the first set of leaves come out, and then whenever it grows, it doesn't affect it, and it's not such a leggy plant sticking out of the ground. And those will do better. The others are under a grow light, and hopefully by the time that's actually transplant date for them, they'll be the right size. It's a little harder growing in the warmer weather, trying to get a cool weather plant, because all of y'all up north, and a lot of you, maybe you're just now getting tomatoes and stuff like that, and my crop's it's still producing, but it's the crop, the quality of the tomatoes aren't as good as they were earlier in the season, and a lot of you up in the northern areas, your tomatoes are just coming on and you have nice beautiful tomatoes. There's very few garden plants that you need to care about your zones for. Now, as far as onions, when you plant onions, you need to know whether you're going to plant a long day onion, a neutral day onion, or a short day onion. Down south, our days are shorter. Up north, your days are longer, and then in between there, it's neutral. A lot of times you can plant long and short day onions, depending on which part of that middle you're at. But that's one of the few crops that are sensitive to the amount of daylight they get. That's why you don't get onion bulbs in the winter. Even though down south our temperature might be warm enough, we don't have a long enough day even for short day onions to start them in that bulbing process. And understand your crops. I try to make this channel's designed to make gardening simpler, and sometimes it seems like a certain amount of the process is complicated, but it's really not. It's just a matter of, like anything, understanding what you're doing, what you're growing, and once you do that, you're going to have a better crop. If you're in an area where you're not like me, to where you've got almost, I don't know what it is, 260 days of growing season between frosts or something. If you're not in an area like that, it might be 275. Pick crops that are different. Now it's just like this. It's just like this cabbage here. This cabbage is early girl. Now I do have a late Dutch cabbage that I'm planting too this fall. But the early girl gets its name because the heads come on early. It's got a shorter time to harvest. And all your plants that you put out, you can Google. I think an excellent source for a lot of information on your plants, and I'm not affiliated with Johnny's, but I really like their catalog. There's of course they have the time to harvest, but one of the things I like that's in here is, say I'm going to plant eggplant. They have a guide in here that tells you all about eggplants, diseases, pests, harvest. It tells you what temperatures that the seeds germinate best at. These old catalogs, I give them to a lot of gardeners. Now, of course, I get a new one because I do buy seeds from Johnny's. But I really like their catalog. I like to keep it around. One thing about this catalog is when you're looking for something, of course you don't want to start looking to get something right now and you don't know how long it's going to take for you to get it, and if you don't have a long growing season. But you might still consider like purchasing some type of seed, like let's say squash, for instance. When you go to look at these different squashes, you can pick you whatever type you want. You can look and see how many days it is to harvest, and you can figure now you're not going to want, if it's, for instance, if this squash is 50 days to harvest, you don't want to plant it if your average first frost date is just going to be 50 days away. Because what's going to end up happening is, okay, you might get a squash off of it in 50 days. But then if your first frost comes, which frost is going to kill a squash just deader than a doornail, that's all you're going to get is that one squash. You want to look at your days that you have left to your average first frost, and you might be lucky it might come later, or it could come earlier and you still lose your crop. But you want to look at it and you want to leave yourself at least a couple weeks of harvest time in there. So if you have 50 days and say you add 14 days to it and you get 64 days, and that would give you a little bit of harvest off that plant. And to understand, if depending on where you're at, but once you get past the summer solstice and the days start getting shorter, and you're up north, because your days are going to be shorter than ours are down south. Once ours are going to be shorter too, but y'all's are going to get quite a bit shorter up there because the angle of the sun. You're not going to have as much light, so a lot of plants won't grow quite as well. Most of these numbers are like in your summer growing season, so you want to be able to add a little bit of that on there too. So understand, if you're going to try to grow this, and depend on how warm it is when it frosts, because it doesn't have to get down to freezing to frost. It's just got to get down you have to have the right conditions in the atmosphere for it to frost. So your plant could survive a lot of times if you covered it with fleece or something like that, but you need to decide if that's what you want to do to try to extend your season on that. But that's just a for instance. As you're planning planning out your fall garden, like I say, look at your first freeze dates too. That way you'll know on a lot of your cold hardy plants that a frost won't hurt. Kales and collards. There's a lot of broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage. A lot of these brassicas that it won't bother. I planted cabbage in the fall, late in the fall, and It's actually went through the winter in my area, and we actually got snow that year, and it actually snowed on it. Well, it did get cold enough, it turned a few of the outer leaves colored, and then it just kept on growing, and it was already headed, but kind of leave them in the field as long as they're not trying to bolt up and seed. But after the snow melted, these cabbages were just as good. In fact, they might have been a little better. I didn't really taste test to know. I just knew that I had my cabbages, and they didn't get damaged by the cold temperatures of the snow. So understand, a lot of your vegetables, like your brassicas, will withstand a lot of these temperatures. Also, when you're planting a fall garden, your pest pressure is going to be lower. You're not going to have near as many problems. You might have some pests that carries over from the summer, but you can get rid of them, and then their cycle's over, and they won't be back until next year. So you end up with not as much pressure. If you plant cabbage in the spring, you have a higher problem with your cabbage loopers and like that. You've got your moths are out and stuff. But in the fall, you don't have those same pressures. So a lot of times it's easier for planting them. I know my greens, if I put them out real early, get them out just as soon as I can get them up, I'll have a good crop. But if I try to do a succession planting after that, I end up with the pest pressure so bad that I can't get a crop. Now, a lot of these recommendations that, like these ones from the extension service for the planting dates, a lot of it has to do with certain things like that too, because they're not going to recommend to plant something when your pest pressure is real high, and as soon as it comes up, your bugs are going to start to eat it. So that's another thing to consider. But fall gardens are always easier to take care of. You don't have it, your grass and weeds don't grow as fast. Your bug pressure is lower. Your temperatures are cooler. A lot of plants respond better. I can take you out here where I've succession planted my cucumbers, and my early cucumbers would have been 10 times as big by now, because they weren't dealing with 95-degree temperatures. So ideally, if you have time, the season's long enough for a second crop and your temperatures aren't that hot, ideally that's another crop. And some crops actually grow good. The biggest problem about planting them earlier is getting them up, just like my carrots. If you can get them germinated and you can keep them healthy and get the roots in, they're going to enjoy this sunlight. They're going to come on. They're going to grow good as long as they have moisture. And ideally, with a drip system like I have, it's easy enough. Of course, right now, because of our high temperatures, I take and hand water too, to make sure. I still have some slow germinating seeds that didn't germinate out there, and so I keep watering until I get them all up. And that's like with any of them, I'll hand water until I get my seeds to germinate. And a lot of that gives me 100% germination, or on a lot of my other seeds that I can really tell. Now, I can't tell on carrots because there's so many seeds that's sown in there. But with like my squash, a lot of my succession planting squash, my second plant of summer squash, is I've got 100% germination. I've put one seed per spot, and of course, as close as they are, if I lose one, I've still got a lot that's going to be in there to fill it in. But if you have any questions about this, or any comments about the information that I'm giving, go ahead and put it in the comments below. I'd be glad to answer them, and I'm sure if there's some other information that's left out that needs to be addressed, or maybe something you just want to see me do a video on, go ahead and put it down in the comments, because I want to hear from you and see just what you feel about that, and maybe what plants you're planting for your fall crop. There might be some that I forgot about, but there's a lot of crops this year that I'm growing that I don't normally grow, and that's the thing about gardening. You have an opportunity. Sometimes we just think about our normal staple crops like what you'd normally pick up in the supermarket, but Carobi, I've never grown Carobi. I'll grow Carobi this year. Leek, I've never grown leek. I'll grow it this year. But there's and parsnips, if I ever get some up, I'll grow them this year. But understand that these plants are there's so many varieties that you can plant, as long as you know how long it takes them to grow, and you can figure out when to adapt them to your growing climate, because you can't just go by zone. I know on a seed packet it says plant them at this time in this zone, but you can't just go by that, because and another thing about planting in seed trays, the reason why I do it, when your temperature is 90 degrees, 95, or even pushing 100, where we get a lot of years, we've got 106. A lot of seeds really are slow to germinate, and they struggle so hard to keep enough moisture to get them up to a certain size. So when you plant them in seed trays and you plant them inside, they have those cooler temperatures. Even if you're just keeping it down to 80, 85, they have a much cooler temperature. They germinate better, and you can get that plant up to a size that when you do put it out, it can handle that heat, as long as you don't let them get too big, because that's when you start transplanting plants that are too big, you have the same problem as you do with transplanting plants that are too small. They have to get their roots into the ground, they have to get adjusted to it, and you can water, but if the sun's really cooking, it's 95 degrees, it's sunny, or stuff like that, a lot of times you have a problem with transplanting. So understand this too, when you're succession planting and you're doing transplants, take and pick you a overcast day. If it doesn't say an overcast day is coming, at least make sure you plant them in the evening, because then they have that nighttime temperature to try to adjust some, and it makes it a little bit easier on them. And you might even, certain crops, like if you're trying to start lettuces now and you're putting them out, see if you can find a shady spot if you're in an area like I am, to where that direct sun is going to be so hard on, because some lettuces really tend to bolt in a hurry whenever they get a lot of sunlight. So if they can have kind of a shady spot, maybe it's another crop that shades them a little bit, you can increase your success on getting harvest on that plant, and get them out as early as you can. I know it's hard. It takes a lot of calculation to really keep a garden going, and we'll go into that a little bit, and we'll go out here and see a few things that I'm growing. I know I've done a garden tour here a few days ago, but we'll go over a few things again. Right here is my glass gem corn. Now I planted this right out here in front of my workshop, and I figured I'd see if I could get a crop. It was just so appealing, the kernels and the colors and stuff like that, so I figured I would see what happened. One reason I planted it over here is because I have my poppy turquoise corn in the other garden, and I don't want a chance of them cross-pollinating, so I planted this one out here. Now over here, of course, you can tell these summer squash. This was a second planting of it. And these are basically gone. These really didn't do too good because where they were at, for one. But we did get quite a few squash off them before they died out. But what I wanted to talk about over here was this Swiss chard. Now, we've had some hot temperatures. Of course, I've kept this water. I'll come out here in the morning and I'd give it some water, and then I come out in the evening. It's never been super big like a lot of chard would be because it likes a little bit cooler temperatures, but it's really been a good substitute for lettuce. In fact, I had a BLT today because I have, you know, some nice tomatoes still coming on, and I come out here and I'll pick me a few leaves of chard and use them as a lettuce substitute. Now my hoppy turquoise corn, it's doing good. This stuff is up about, I'd have to say 3.5 feet tall, and it's really looking good, and it'll definitely make it. But I've got my parsnips here, and I'm determined to get them up. And they take a lot of moisture, and one of the problems of keeping enough moisture is, like, say, the temperature, because the sun drying out. Now these onions here, and we do have one right here that's deciding to go ahead and bolt. But these were, and I probably missed it when I pulled them, but these were the ones from last year. I collected seed, and then I pulled all the parts that bolted off, and I put them back. So these, I'll use these for some table onions and then let them go back to seed again. I'm going to go ahead and plant some seeds of them, but they do good. Like I say, I just pull them up, I cut them off, let them set, and of course they'll start trying to grow, and then I put them back out and I'll let them grow into table onions. Now I have got my second succession. Well, this is the third succession, but this is the first one for the sunburst, and I actually see one female flower coming on, so looks like it won't be long we'll be harvesting some squash off of there. And right here, as you can see, these onions are really doing well. I just come out here and I water them, and I'm still getting a few little ones. You can see how small that one is. They're still coming up. I'm keeping moisture there, but even at that, they ought to do real good. I've got some that are forming their second set of leaves. And I actually have two different types. That's Denver, and this is Impetor. I think that's Impetor. I think that's how you pronounce it. But these here will come in, and I wanted to put them here. This dinosaur kale, it was kind of put in here as an afterthought, because I had to put it somewhere, and I had this open. So it made it a little bit harder to cover these carrots and get them to germinate. But as you can see, I should have a pretty good crop of these. Now these other squash here, as you can see, it's got a real good germination on them. It looks like I got one missing right there that's didn't come up, so I guess it wasn't 100%. These over here, these were planted about a week or so later. This is a Spineless Perfection, and it still has a few that hadn't come up. I'm missing one here and missing one here, but as you can see, they're coming up. They're just really some of them are just a little bit slower than the others, but there's another one just popping the ground. But understand that's that's what's going to happen. Looks like I got, not sure if that's a squash coming up there or no. I think that's actually the first of my cilantro that's coming up. So hopefully I'll have a little cilantro. I like to go ahead and pick it and freeze it. Whenever I thaw it out from the freezer, it's just like it was fresh. I can chop it up and use it like fresh cilantro. Here's some more of the succession planting. This is some more of the red curry, but what I wanted to show you down here, and of course don't always like to see the bad stuff, but you can see that one snapped off. The wind got it. They're not quite big enough to keep them from turning over, and whenever that happened, it did it in. So that's something to think about sometimes whenever you planting some extras, so you do have enough for when you lose plants. And these Mississippi silver skin peas, which there's 2 rows of them, but they're almost grown together like one wide row. Same thing here. This is a little bit slower on this end. Sometimes that happens. And the lima beans, they were planted the same time, and they're really doing good. Some of them's actually already almost to, well, I think there's one that's at the top of the trellis. So realize on a lot of these, they grow quick for succession planting. Now these haven't started blooming, but these haven't, I don't even think it's been a month since these have been in here. If they've got good soil, and this was just compost put down, and then I did actually fertilize these one time after they started up, and I thought about going back, and I said no, there's probably no sense in it the way that they're going. So because peas they're grown out in the field, and they really kind of fend for themselves a lot of times, and they'll still produce good. These would possibly even start flowering if they didn't have such a rich growing environment. And you know, we have our winter squash, or second planting of that and everything, but this whole thing, now this was planted in stages. As I was building beds coming down here, I was laying out my drip line and going ahead and planting them, but I had to build all these beds this year because this was a new garden spot, and it's all in stages because of that. But everything's doing good, everything's on schedule, and if I don't get a crop, it's pretty to look at anyway. These purple hull peas here, these were planted in about I think about a week after those other green peas up there and the green beans. So they're running a little behind, but they're really doing good. I also I did a little different down here. Up there I did a double drip line, and I put the rows a little further apart. These I ran a single line, which they're getting enough water that they're doing okay. They might have grew faster if they had more. I can't say that because I didn't run a test trial to see that, but I think next year on the other ones I'll just run a single line too. These are my tomatoes I planted back in the spring, and as you can see, I've kind of mismanaged. I haven't taken care of blight and stuff. Now the tomatoes aren't as pretty, a lot of them smaller, but you can see that there's still quite a few tomatoes here on these. Now I did take my cherry tomatoes, they were looking pretty rough, so I trimmed all the blight off of them. I'll let these go a while longer. They're still producing good. In fact, I get enough cherry tomatoes I could take and just eat cherry tomatoes every few days. And they're little, but it's good taste being able to come out here in the garden and eat them. But I hope this video gives you a better understanding on your planting times and choosing dates to plant. I really would like to encourage those of you that grow a garden. I know that there's a lot of vegetables that you can only grow in the summer, tomatoes and stuff like that, but there are so many vegetables, especially if you have a long growing season like we do here, where we can grow a succession planting of corn and winter squash a couple of times and stuff like that. But realize there are a lot of crops that you can plant in your garden, and just know to go by the first frost date and the first freeze date. That way you can understand what you can plant and have a successful fall garden. If you like this, go ahead and hit the like button and share it. And if you want to see more of these, just subscribe and hit the bell button. Happy gardening.